echoes from Crimson Hill. On the third night after she moved in, Mara woke to a sound like a small thing remembering how to be itself. It was not wind or rain. It had a shape she recognized only in fragments. A single, clear ring, then silence. The house crouched around her, corners and stairways folding into a kind of patience she had not expected. Her boxes were half unpacked, her life temporarily arranged in stacks by the hearth. But the bell's note seemed to come from the center of the house, as if the walls themselves had an agenda. She found the bell the next morning on a lone side table. Porcelain, a faded ribbon once bright with a deep red hairline cracks like fine route maps. There was no dust beneath it. It had not sat untouched for long. That afternoon, she discovered the red ledger in a locked bureau, leather soft with age, pages full of names in a steady, patient hand. The ledger smelled faintly of ink and something older, like the room had been kept waiting for a reader who had taken too long to arrive. The house was friendly in the way of things that are older than politeness. It offered easy nooks and warm shelves, but its favors came with unease. On the first page Mara opened, she found a name she knew her own dated a week before she arrived, written in the same neat script that filled the volume. There was no signature, only that date and a single note in the margin: listen. She read the word twice, then 3 times, as if the act of repetition might change its shape and reveal the instruction beneath. Outside, the town slid around its routines. Neighbors passed by with polite, curt nods. Their smiles never reached their eyes. Mr. Hale, who lived down the lane, left small things on Mara's porch: trimmed rosemary, a tin of coffee beans, a single stamped map of the hill. He spoke in fragments, as if piecing an old story from memory. They say the house keeps a ledger, keeps names like a ledger keeps accounts. It listens for an answering voice. His hands trembled when he handed her the map. He would not meet her gaze. At night, the distinction between waking and dreaming thinned. Mara dreamed of a corridor with doors that led to other people's memories. A woman folding a shirt into a perfect rectangle, laughter stored in a teacup, a child tracing the outline of a window with a stick. Each door she opened returned a single note of the same clear bell, and sometimes the bell's tone felt like a name being said with tenderness. She would wake with that note lodged behind her breastbone and a taste of metal on her tongue. Ledger's entries were not all the same. Some names had annotations, dates, tiny verb-like marks, a column of faint numerals. Others were crossed out so delicately, it was almost as if the ink had been unmade. Mara discovered pages where the handwriting altered subtly midline, shifting from steady script to tight, hurried looping. Once, under a section of dotted names, someone had pressed the paper to the ledger and left a faint, circular impression, like a thumbprint of intention rather than identity. She began to experiment. If the bell rang, she would not cross to it. She would sit very still and listen. The house responded by rearranging the room around her, footstools where none had been, photographs shifted a fraction, the radio tuned to someone else's old station. It felt like a negotiation whose terms she could not yet name. Hold your breath, do not answer, and the house will speak back in smaller things. Sometimes that was relief. Sometimes it felt worse, a bartering with an appetite she could not see. Mr. Hale returned one evening with a lantern and a story that began softly and then stopped, as if thinking better of its ending. He told her that once the hill had been a place, people came to ask certain questions aloud, and that those questions tended to stay. "They don't always take your life," he said, voice low and patient. "Sometimes they take a voice. A story you thought was yours becomes a thing that answers when someone calls it." His hands clutched the lantern, as if it were the only honest thing in his possession. One afternoon, Mara climbed to the attic, a long room tilted with roof lines and boxed light. It smelled of old paper and lemon oil. In a corner, she found a small chair and a child's songbook. The pages thumbed until the margin corners curled like leaves. There was a faint impression in one margin, letters gone to ghost. Mara, so faint she could barely convince herself her eyes were not making them up. She thought of the ledger, the bell, the way the house seemed to recognize her, as if she were a familiar chord. The recordings started with small things: a lullaby on the radio at odd hours, a voice humming under the floorboards when she poured tea. Once, when she raised the bell to her ear, it answered with a voice that sounded startlingly like her own. The voice did not speak words so much as make a space where a name could fit. Mara began to check places she had walked that day, seeing footprints where none should be, the impression of hands on windows. The ledger's neat rows had become a map she could not stop reading. She tried to leave and found the hill indifferent to her plans. The road folded in on itself. The turn she knew led her back to a low wall she had passed an hour before. The town's lanes were the same, people too polite to stop the confusion, and at dusk the cold seemed to pull the air from her lungs. On the third attempt, a neighbor's dog found her and padded along, as if escorting her to an appointment she had forgotten. The ledger's margin note, "Listen," felt less like instruction and more like a summoning. She burned a page from the ledger once, testing the belief that destruction would set her free. The flame gave the leather a hiss and the smell of old ink, but the next morning, the same page lay on her bedside table, edges intact, its writing unchanged. Instead of fear, the house felt amused, like a living thing that had learned how to play with her expectations. She stopped trusting gestures meant to sever ties. The house kept a patient inventory of attempts and failures. Late one night, she opened the ledger to a blank page, and on impulse more compelled than choice, she set her pen to it. She wrote a name she had been carrying quietly: an old lover, a claimed line of the past, and beneath it, with a steadier hand than she felt, she wrote, "I am here." The ink dried in the soft lamplight, and for an instant the house held its breath. Then the bell rang once, not accusingly, but with the tilt of recognition, as if some small thing in the building had learned her signature. The ending, if there can be called such, is patient and precise. Mara did not leave in a hurry, nor did she stay in cheerful denial. She began to make choices about which sounds to answer and which to ignore. Some nights she let the lullaby drift by and felt the house rearrange itself into a gentler pattern. Other times she answered and felt a thing shift, as if a voice had found purchase. The ledger continued to fill slowly, reliably, like tidal marks. The town noticed and did not comment. Morning found the bell on Mara's own porch, ribbon neat and unworn, although she had never moved it there. There was no flourish, No triumphant reveal, only a small, everyday inevitability that felt worse for its normalcy. When she lifted it, the tone answered with a softness that reminded her of memorized prayers. She kept it on the table near the ledger and learned, in small increments, how to live with an answering that did not consume, but did not entirely release either. The house had not taken her voice, it had given it a different audience. There are questions without tidy ends. Mara adjusted her life around a new economy of attention, which echoes to accept, when to close the book, how to speak without obligating an answer. Sometimes, when the wind sits in the valley just so, passers-by hear a faint chime and think of nothing but their own errands. Other times, the bell seems to call like a remembering friend, and someone, somewhere, answers. The ledger continued its slow, patient bookkeeping, and somewhere, beyond the hill, people still wondered, who kept listening long after the house stopped asking.